let's talk knitting maths. So welcome back to any returning viewers, to any new viewers, a very warm welcome to you. Those of you who were around last week will know that I am starting a project where I'm working out the numbers and the patterning for a sweater that I'm going to knit. It's a Lopa yarn sweater, so based on the Icelandic Lopa Pesa style of sweater. Last week we were talking plans, this week we're talking numbers. So if you haven't seen last week's video, by all means do pop back and have a look just to see where I'm heading and what makes a Lopa Pesa sweater, that kind of stuff. Very much sort of an introduction to the project. Today we're going to be working out how many stitches we need, starting to get the pattern together, to get the basic numbers ready to knit it all up. The maths that I'm going to show you is very sort of basic, beginning patterning maths. It's not all the details of grading and getting different sizes and stuff. It's just how to knit a sweater that fits your measurements with the amount of ease that you want. I am working for a bottom-up sweater, but the maths itself is pretty much the same. So first of all, let's take a little look at our swatch, because that's what we need first. We need to know our stitch count, our gauge for the project that we're going to be working on. So I've knit up a swatch in the yarn that I bought in Iceland, the Pluta Lopa yarn. I've washed it and blocked it and we're ready to measure it. So let's go take a look at that. Okay, so here is my washed and blocked swatch. I've used a 4mm needle and I quite like the fabric it's produced. I've not got it pinned out. I did lightly pin it to dry it, just to sort of hold it flat as it dried, but not to reshape it at all. I've worked 24 stitches wide stocking stitch, and until it was 5 inches in the stocking stitch section. I like to work a garter edge around my swatches because, again, it helps it lay flat, which makes it easier to measure. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the width. Now we are over 24 stitches, well, over 4 inches with our 24 stitches. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to count from 1 inch to 4 inch how many stitches I've got there, and I'm going to make a note of that. I make that 22 stitches for 4 inches. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing for the rows. So 4 inches worth of rows to count. And again, I'm going to make a note of that number. So I make that 31. So that is my gauge. Now for this particular project, the gauge for the stitch is more important than the gauge for the rows. Not that the gauge for the rows isn't important, it's just less important. Because I'm not going to be putting in waist shaping, I'm going to be knitting to length. So it's only once I get to the yoke that the row gauge is going to really matter. And row gauge on colourwork and stitch gauge on colourwork can change slightly. I usually have to go up a needle size for colourwork. But it'll give me a bit of a guideline as to how many rows per colour and where to do my decreases, that kind of thing. So that's my gauge, 22 stitches, 31 rows to 4 inches. Now I could divide those by 4 and use that to work out my stitch numbers. I could leave it as it is and divide my measurements by 4. We'll see where we go with that. It kind of depends on what the measurements are going to be. Because if you're dividing, you want something that's easy to divide. So next step is my body measurements. Okay, so for the purposes of this particular project, I need some specific measurements. You want your widest part. So for some people, depending on your body shape, it's going to be your bust, could be your waist, could be your hips. I'm going to measure all 3. I think it's probably the bust, but could be the hips. Just to say that I've got all 3 there. If I was going to do waist shaping, which I'm not in this project, I would also be working out where my waist falls between like my armpit and where I want the hem to sit. And that's the point I'm going to measure for the hips is where I want the hem to sit. And then I'm also going to do some length stuff, but we'll go into that in a minute. So first up, tape measure. I've got a notebook down there as well, so I'm going to be jotting things down as we go, because we're going to need to do some calculations once we've got the measurements done. This tape measure really does need replacing. They stretch out over time, but it just stretches out on this one in the first part. So I usually start measuring at about 10 inches and take 10 off the final measurement. So I'm going to measure the fullest part of my bust for the purposes of this. I don't want a close fitting garment, so I'm not going to worry too much about the high bust, but for some people you're going to get a better fit with high bust than full bust. It sort of depends on the difference that you've got between the two. So you want your tape measure as parallel to the floor as you can get it, and you just want to get it an even measurement all the way around, not too tight, not too loose. So that's coming at 56. I need to take my 10 off because my tape measure is stretched out. So 46. I'm going to jot that down. I'm working in inches. If you work better in centimetres, by all means do. If you're working in centimetres, your swatch will be 10 centimetres by 10 centimetres, which is the same as 4 inches. Okay, so now waist, which I'll say I don't think is my widest point. I think it's currently my narrowest point, which is what they should be, really, waists. And I'm not doing waist shaping, so it's not going to matter too much. Yeah, 43. And then hips, so your largest point around your hips actually is roughly where I want mine to sit. It might be slightly longer. My tape measure isn't quite long enough, so my hips are definitely my largest point. Okay, so first 5 inches that are stretched out, so we'll go to the 5. That's 52. I do have other tape measures in the house, but could I find them? Of course not. Why would you be able to find something that you need when you need it? Okay, so I now want to do length. So I want my body length and I want my sleeve length. For the purposes of this project, that's up to the armpits because I'm working bottom up. So I'm going to put my 10-inch mark in my armpit and sit the plastic bit of the tape measure at the bottom. So I want my hem to be about there, so just at the bottom of the shot. So that is 15 inches. I'm going to do the same thing for the sleeve. I'm going to put the 10-inch mark in the armpit. And I want a generous sleeve, so we'll go over the hand a little bit, so we'll go to there. That's 19 inches. That seems a little weird. So it seems a little bit weird that they're longer, but actually when I look at my sleeves alongside the hem of the top I'm currently wearing, yeah, the sleeves are longer, so that makes a little bit more sense. The other measurement that I want to look at is the yoke depth. So we're doing I'm doing a circular yoke on my pattern. So I need to measure how far we've got from the neck to in line with the armpits to give me a bit of guidance as to how many rows, how much repetition is going in the yoke. So again, I've got my 10 at my neck, so my armpit is on this stripe here, so we're about there, and that gives me 7 inches. I am aiming for a garment that is loose and able to go over the top of things, so an outerwear replacement, almost like a jacket replacement in a way. The Lopi yarn is quite often used as outerwear in Iceland. It's what it's designed for, so makes sense for it to be an outer garment. So I'm going to be adding a reasonable amount of wearing ease to my circumference measurements, and I'll probably add a bit to the depth of the yoke as well, just to make sure that there's space under the arms for things, so that I can move my arms once I'm wearing it, because that's helpful. So I'll probably add 3 inches to the circumference measurements, and probably an inch to the yoke depth, maybe 2. I'll be looking at the patterns in the book for guidance on that, and I'll let you know what I've ended up with when we've got all the numbers together. But what I need to do, circumference wise, is going to be fine. I know 3 inches will be fine for wearing these. It's more the depth of the yoke that I want to double check. So what I need to do to work out my stitch count for how many stitches to cast on, because I can get the body and the sleeves done before I get anywhere near working out how deep the yoke's going to be. I need to work out how many stitches I need to cast on. So I need to take my largest measurement for the body and work out how many stitches fit in that. Actually, I'm going to need some measurements for my sleeves as well. I'm going to need bicep, and I'm going to need wrist as well. So we'll do those. Bicep, wrist, because we're going to be working the sleeves from cuff up as well. We need to know how many stitches to cast on for the cuff of the sleeves. So again, 10 inches. So that's 7 inches. Again, I will be adding wearing ease to the cuff. I'll probably only add a little bit of wearing ease to the cuff, maybe an inch, so that it's a bit more cinched in. But for the bicep, it'll be 2 to 3 inches, so it's in keeping with the rest of the sweater. So that gives me 13 inches. Okay, so yeah, 3 inches onto the bicep measurement will be in line with other sweaters I've knitted with a looser sleeve, so it'll be 16-inch sleeve. And then I can do tighter at the cuff and a bit of rapid increases onto the cuff. I think it looks quite nice, so you've got a more cinched in cuff. So that's probably where I'm going to go with that. So that's my measurements. We need to do some knitting maths, do some division and multiplication. So if you need a calculator, get a calculator. Just don't forget to write down your stuff, write down your measurements, because you're going to need them. Okay, so basic knitting maths. If you've done a swatch of 4 inches or 10 centimetres, to work out your stitch count per inch or per centimetre, you do a division. So for me, I do it in inches, so 22 stitches divided by 4 gives me 5.5 stitches per inch. If I was doing it in centimetres, I'd be dividing 22 by 10, so that's going to give me 2.2 stitches per centimetre. So you can either work out your stitch count by multiplying the stitch count per inch by the number of inches you want cast on, or you can divide your total measurement by 4 and multiply that answer by your stitch count per 4 inches. I will put the equations on the screen for you so that you can see them. I am going with the stitch count per 1 inch because it's a quicker calculation for me, and because I've already worked out the stitch count per inch, I can do it for all things. But dividing by 4 and multiplying by 22, it's not too much of an issue. So I need 55 inches to give me 3 inches of ease at my hip. That is going to give me a lot of ease at my bust, because my bust is 43 inches, but that's okay because this isn't a loose fitting outer garment. So it's going to give me nearly 10 inches at my bust. That's quite a lot, but it will mean that you can go over the top of things and layer. I may decide to reduce that slightly as I knit up the body. We'll see as I try it on as I go whilst I'm knitting. It's just my initial stitch counts to get cast on. If I do adjust it on the body as I go, I will need to change the yoke pattern. So what for today's video, we'll just be doing like a draft yoke pattern, and we'll get into any alterations if I need to make them in a later video. So I have 55 inches to cast on, and I'm going to times that by 5.5, which is my stitch count per 1 inch. That gives me 302.5 stitches. I can't cast on half a stitch, don't know about you, but I haven't worked out how to do that. So because I've got a reasonable amount of ease, I'm going to just cast on 302 stitches. Now, my plan is to then knit that to the length of the armpits. So that would mean knitting for 15 inches. So I'm just making a little note in my book so that I've got that down. I will, of course, once I've got to 15 inches, be trying it on and checking that I'm happy with the length before blocking. What I didn't do was measure my swatch before. I didn't count the rows and count the stitches before I blocked it, but I do know how many stitches I worked and how long I worked for, so I have a rough idea of how much change is going to happen. It doesn't look how much change is going to happen to the length, but it will grow slightly in width because I knitted 24 stitches in stocking stitch, but my 4-inch stitch count is 22 stitches. So for every 4 inches, there's 2 extra stitches leeway as you knit it, so it's going to get bigger by 2 stitches effectively. It'll grow slightly, so I just need to bear that in mind when I'm trying on, that it will be a looser fit once it's blocked, assuming that the garment behaves in the same way as the swatch. So yes, that's my body numbers done. I am going to be putting ribbing on the bottom. I am going to be putting a zigzag of one of my contrast colours around the bottom, so I will chart that out, the zigzag out later on, and it'll be the same for the body as for the cuffs. So yeah, that'll all come when I'm dealing with squares and excels and yoke patterns and things. The next thing I need to work out is the sleeves. So for the sleeves, I want, let's say 8 inches for the cuffs. So we'll just give an inch ease at the cuff. And I'm going to need to work out increases to get it up to the bicep. So bicep needs, we're doing 16 inches because we're going for 3 inches ease. I am noting down how much ease I'm putting in as well, so that when I'm looking at my notes and I'm checking my calculations, I can see how much I've added. Okay, so 8 times 5.5 is 44. So I need to cast on 44 stitches. And I need to increase to 16 times 5.5, 88 stitches by bicep. So I need to be able to, as I'm working out my row by row instructions, I'll be able to work out how far I want to increase. I might do a fair few of those increases immediately after the cuff to get a looser fit on the arm, and then maybe a more gradual increase up into the elbow, so that once I'm onto the biceps, I've got the full 16 inches. We'll see. We're only talking about, well, we're talking about doubling our stitch count on the sleeves, so that's not too terrifying. So the next thing to work out is how many rows deep the yoke is going to be. I'm going to work these out as if it's an 8-inch depth for now, and I'll update you if I change that later on, but I'll give you an idea of how we're working it out. So the yoke, we need to look at the row count. So 31 rows per 4 inches. And so 31 divided by 4 is 7.75 rows per inch. So times that by 8 for an 8-inch row depth, we're looking at about 62 rows as an approximation. By the time we've got to the yoke, we will have all of the body stitches, so 302 body stitches, plus 88 stitches for each sleeve. So we will have a total of 302 plus 88 plus 88. That equals 478. And what I haven't done is added in the steek stitches yet. So plus steek, so I'll just make a little note of that. If you're not doing an open front cardigan, if you're just doing a pullover, then you don't need to worry about steek stitches, but I'll be adding in between 2 and 4 stitches to cut open later on. But the maths is still the same. You just add those steek stitches on to your body measurement, your body count cast on, and to your yoke stitch count. So 478, that divides quite nicely by 4. No, it doesn't. What I'm going to need to work out is how wide my stitch, like a colourwork repeat, is going to be. So that's what I'm thinking at the moment. So let's divide it by 6. Okay, we need to have a little bit of a fiddle around with the colourwork pattern and the stitch count. Once I've worked out something that's going to work and be close to the right count of stitches, I may need to adjust my numbers, because what you need to have is stitch count that'll be divisible by whatever pattern repeat you're putting in. But you've got the basic idea of how to work out how many stitches to go around your various body parts. So I will come back to you with a drafted yoke pattern and any adjustments I've needed to make to the body and the sleeves to accommodate that. Can't see it being a massive difference. I might have to lose a couple of stitches here and there just to make the numbers work out. I mean, I could add stitches in, but as I've got a fair bit of ease anyway, I think taking a couple of stitches out is going to be a better option because I've got space to play with. Okay, so let me go and do a little bit of maths and sketching out on Excel, and I'll come back to you. Okay, so we are ready to look at the numbers now. Now we've got our body measurements and we've got our stitch count, our gauge count. I did have to do one more body measurement that I didn't include in the little clip there because I forgot I'd need to know how big my neck was. So I've included that as well. So it's a little bit of tweaking that I've needed to do based on the numbers that I had before. So we knew that I was looking at 302 stitches for the hem, for instance, for the amount of ease that I was looking for. But I also need to make it work to fit the colourwork pattern. So I've done a bit of tweaking, done a bit of jiggery-pokery to make things work. So let's take a little look, first of all, at the colourwork that I'm going to be including, and then we'll look at the numbers and how I've adjusted them to fit what I need for the colourwork design that I'm going for. So I've done a bit of a screen capture. I've been working in Excel. Okay, so first things first, this is the chart that I've put together for my yoke pattern. So the grey squares are the body colour, and then my contrast colours are the black, the dark blue and the light blue. These white squares are where I'm going to be decreasing. So I'll briefly touch on how I worked out those decreases in a bit. Key feature of this one is this red block here. So that is the repeat that's going to be going all the way around the yoke. So I needed to make sure that the stitch count for the yoke was divisible by 12, which is the number of stitches in that repeat. So I'll tend to work on one block of the graphic and then copy and paste it and then select my repeat afterwards. That way I know I've got the same and I've got a rough idea of how it's going to look together because I've got more than one repeat in the image. The cuff and hem, I'm going to be putting the zigzag from the bottom of that yoke pattern around, and again that needs to be divisible by 12. So I have had to do a little bit of tweaking to my initial numbers to make sure that the repeat fits into the stitches that I'll have on the needles. So let's take a little look at the calculations that I've worked on. Now, I know this tab of the spreadsheet is going to look a little bit confusing. Don't worry too much about the highlighting. That's just things that I wanted to make sure that I referenced when I was working things out. first thing that I did was I put in my gauge. So I've done the gauge over 4 inches, which is 22 stitches, 31 rows, and then the gauge over 1 inch, so 5.5 stitches and 7.75 rows, because I was going to be needing to use those numbers to work out some of the other counts later on. The next step is to work out the basic number of stitches that you need for the measurement that you want. So I've listed all the measurements that I took. I did have to take a neck measurement, which I didn't include on the previous recording because I forgot at the time. But you will need to know how many stitches you're going to need around the neck to make sure you can get your head through. So bust, waist, hips, body length, sleeve length, bicep, wrist, yoke, neck depth, and neck. And then I've put my actual measurements here. Now I've highlighted the bust and the hips. For the type of sweater that I'm going for the fit that I'm going for, I don't really want to be doing any shaping for fit. So I needed to decide the measurement I needed to get the stitch count. I'm going with the hips because they are larger than the bust. For you, it might be the other way around, or it might even be the waist that is your largest measurement. But I did want to make sure that I wasn't too far adrift of stitch count for the bust, so that it wasn't like overwhelmingly large, but it does need to be bigger enough than my bust to layer things underneath it. The second column is the amount of ease that I'm adding. So I'm adding 3 inches in most places. I'm not worrying about adding ease to the body length and the sleeve length. I'm just going to knit 2 lengths, although I have worked out the row count for those. And I am adding 1 inch at the wrist, so I've got a tighter fitting cuff. And I'm also adding 1 inch to the yoke. That might get taken out as I knit things up, or part of it might get taken out as I knit things up. I'll be trying the sweater on when I'm at the point of picking up the yoke and just checking to see how much I need in terms of length there, allowing a bit of flexibility for layering underneath. It's not so much of an issue at the hem and the cuff if the lengths aren't 100% right, but the yoke is going to make a difference because it's going to affect the ability to move my arms, which is kind of important. My next column is this totals column. So that is just these two figures added together, so the measurement and the ease added together. After that, I have times the total measurement by the gauge over 1 inch. That's this measurement here, to get my basic stitch count for what I need to make sure I've got the size that I'm looking for. I've done the same with row counts for yoke depth and the body length and sleeve length. Not that I tend to count rows whilst I'm knitting, but in terms of charting things out, it's useful to know for colour work graphs. So that's my initial basic counts. And if I wasn't doing any colour work, I didn't need to worry about stitch repeat, that would be fine. Those would be my numbers that I could work on to knit up a basic sweater. Absolutely fine. What I did need to do, that because I am doing colour work, is make sure that everything was divisible by 12. We'll come back to this blue square in a minute. So I knew I would need 108 stitches to be divisible by 12. But again, let's change the colour on that because I made a boo-boo. So we'll come back to that in a minute as well. The cuff, I've decided to go to 48 stitches instead of 44. It was 44. Yeah, 44. Just for a little bit more ease to get my hand through. But it'll still be a fairly cinched in cuff. That has the benefit as well of being divisible by 12. So I had the option then to put the colourwork straight in after the cuff, or to do a rapid increase after the cuff and then put the colourwork in, with it being a little bit looser around the forearm, which is the option that I've gone for, but I'll get into that in a moment. The hemline, I've decided to go with 300 stitches for the main body. This is before I've put steek stitches in, so if you were doing a closed pullover rather than a cardigan, that would be the figure that you would be left with. So 300 stitches. Taking 2 stitches out is not going to make a huge amount of difference to the overall length of the hem. It's still going to be pretty close to what I was aiming for. So I was looking for 55 inches as my basic size, which would have been 302.5 stitches. Obviously I can't do half a stitch. By doing 300 stitches, it's divisible by 12, which means I can do the colour work without any adjustments, and it gives me 54.55 inches. So given that my hip measurement's 52, that still gives me plenty of ease, so I'm happy with that. Now let's talk about this blue box. I was sitting looking at these numbers and starting to write up the instructions, my little note form instructions, not like fully written out pattern or anything, but my little note form instructions, which I'll get onto with you when we start knitting up, and realised that I don't need all of the stitches from the sleeve and the body to knit the yoke. In fact, if I tried to knit all of the stitches from the sleeves and the body for the yoke, it would be a very weird shape and I wouldn't be able to wear it. I needed to put some stitches on hold for under the arm. Now, normally I'll put on between 10 and 12 stitches on hold for underarms. So I thought I'd have a try around those sorts of numbers. I tried 8, I tried 10, I tried 12. I had even numbers stuck in my head. None of them worked out. So in the end, what I've gone with is taking 11 stitches to put on hold. So I've got my calculations here for this one. We can ignore these because this was before I took these stitches out. So taking 11 stitches off at either side of the body gives me 22 stitches to take out, which leaves me 278 body stitches. And for the sleeves, taking 11 off each sleeve leaves me with 77 sleeve stitches on each side. So I end up with 432 stitches for my base of my yoke. So 468, take away 432, there's 36 fewer stitches on the needles for the colour work. So I wanted to double check that is divisible by 12, and it is. It gives me 36 repeats of the yoke pattern around the colour work. So far so good. I've got the base of the yoke all sorted out. I can get my pattern repeat started out. Then I needed to think about the neck. Now, my initial thinking was, okay, divisible by 12, I'll divide the neck measurement by 12 and make sure that the stitch count works that way. Only you've reduced stitches by the time you get to the neck. So I'm going from 432 stitches to 117. And it says 108 here, which was my initial calculation based on my neck measurement. And gives me a reasonable amount of ease at that point as well. So it's nearly 20 inches as opposed to the 18 measurement. 117 will be slightly larger again, which is fine. Loose fit on the neck is not a problem, particularly when you're layering. And there's going to be ribbing on the top as well. So 117 is divisible by the number of stitches that I will have left in my colourwork repeat pattern, because it needs to be exactly the same on each repeat. You can't have different repeats having different stitch counts. That's just would be messy. So to get to close to the measurement that I was looking for, I needed to go down to 3 stitches in each repeat. And 108 is not divisible by 3, 117 is. So that's where we're ending up. So yeah, so those are my numbers. Hopefully that's all made sense. If it doesn't and you're struggling with your own calculations, by all means, either watch the mathsy bit of the video back to see if it makes a bit more sense on the second viewing, or ask in the comments down below. I'm more than happy to try and word things in a different way, because sometimes that helps with the understanding. And next week we'll take a look at the instructions tab. It's very much note form rather than a fully formally written out pattern, but you'll need your own numbers because your measurements will be different to mine. Okay, so that's all of the knitting maths that we need. As I say, if you are knitting along and you want to go away and do your own maths, your own numbers, and work out your own figures, and you're having any difficulty, feel free to ask in the comments. Either myself or anybody else who's hovering around the comments should be able to help you out there. So yeah, by all means, do ask down below. Next week we'll be starting to knit up our projects, so you'll want your numbers done by then. If you want to sort of knit along at the same time as me, so we'll be casting on at that point. So make sure you've got your yarn, make sure you've got the right size needles for the fabric that you want to achieve, and that you've got a roadmap of where you're going. There are some things that may change as we knit them up. Things like the yoke, for instance, that may well change. I may well need to change the depth of it a little bit at the bottom. I may need to tweak the decreases as we go. So I will be doing a fair amount of trying on as I knit. And the good news is when I was knitting up the swatch, it was a lot easier to knit with than I expected. The yarn wasn't breaking the way I thought it probably would. And so I'm a little less concerned if I need to rip out anything and redo it as I knit it up. But more on that next week. So thank you very much for spending some time with me today. I'd love to see you in the next one. But until then, there's this video here that may be of interest to you, and I will see you soon. Until then, happy crafting and bye-bye for now.